Okay. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about and introducing our Unit 4 assignment, which is focused on international communication in terms of both in-person communication and communicating in writing. So this is kind of a cool assignment because you're creating a PowerPoint as opposed to writing something. So it's a little bit of a break from all the writing with the Rocky Mountain assignment. And then our next assignment is another writing piece. So this is a nice way to kind of use your creativity and do a lot with visuals while you're also communicating really important information. So we will jump in by starting with a description of the assignment. So you're going to be developing essentially a video tutorial or a screencast, but you're going to use PowerPoint as your tool. And you're going to focus on educating your group of employees about how to communicate with a different culture. If you read over the assignment, the actual case, you'll see that you're working for a company that's going to send a group of employees overseas to, hopefully to close a deal, right? Or a partnership. There's a purpose in them going there and they need to make a good impression. And in order to do that, they need to communicate in a culturally appropriate way. So the reason, and you can choose any country for this assignment except for China. And the reason for that is just because this assignment has been done with China as the focus at many, many universities. So there are really similar looking assignments kind of just all over the web. And it's almost hard not to plagiarize if you choose China. So pick any other country. One tip I'll give you is don't pick a country like Canada that's very similar to the US. It'll make your assignment really hard. The more different the country is, the easier the assignment will be for you. I chose this picture intentionally. This is how I want you to think of yourself as you're creating the assignment. And you're the guy here standing up. And behind you would be the PowerPoint, right? And then this is your group of employees who you are educating about, let's say, going to Finland. So even though we're not in class, the idea here is to come up with something that you would be able to present physically in a room to your employees, or I suppose virtually on screen where you'd have the PowerPoint and then you'd be talking while you're going through the slides. So think of yourself as the boss or as the teacher in this particular instance. You're giving information, right? In our planning logs, we talk about like, are you persuading? Are you informing? In this case, you are informing. So it's a pretty straightforward rhetorical goal. So, excuse me. I like to start by looking at this image, and it says, look before you leap, right? So in the image, the guy's jumping in, he's having a good time, but he's about to not have a good time, right? He's going to land on this rock that's sticking up and his good time is going to end. That can be similar to going into a culture or a community that you are not familiar with and not bothering to educate yourself about it. So if you were to just fly across the country, let's say to China, without reading up about their customs and their culture and their ways of communication, you would be very likely to make a mistake when communicating and be perceived as rude or unintelligent or mean or any of those things. So it's important to take a look before you leap. And that's kind of the big picture of the assignment, is that you're providing this look into a different country's business culture for your employees before they take the leap and travel over there. And I'm going to share a couple of interesting facts about some other countries, and you can pick one of these countries if you want to. I like to do this just to kind of set the stage for how different other countries really can be. And this assignment really can be fun because some of the differences between cultures are really strange, as we'll see. So in the Netherlands, their form of communication is very, very direct. They do not beat around the bush ever. So when they're delivering bad news, like in America, we tend to have the sandwich effect. So we start with something good, and then we put the bad news in the middle, and then we wrap up with something good at the end. That is not how it works in the Netherlands. They very simply, they give the bad news first, or let's say that maybe it could even be something like a price increase that a vendor has to relay to their customers, and they're just going to jump right in. They're not going to say, well, due to underproduction, or, that one company shut down, so now we're struggling with this. They're just going to say, hey, the price is increasing. This is what it is. If you need to know more, well, just ask and we'll let you know, but they get straight to the point. Very direct. And this is just a quote from someone, a Dutch person, who said, there's no hard feelings, but that's how it works here. And it's a whole lot better than being superficial. So that tells you right there that in the Netherlands, they do not appreciate a lot of small talk and beating around the bush. They want to get right to the point. Okay, so now looking at Indonesia, you should never use your left hand to eat or shake hands when you're in Indonesia. The reason why is because that is considered like your toilet hand. So anything that you would be doing in the bathroom that has to do with the toilet, you do that with your left hand. So it's kind of like the dirty hand. So when you, of course, you could still wash your hands, but it's just, that's part of their culture. They shake hands with their right hand. They eat with their right hand because that's the hand that's designated for those activities. So you can imagine if you chose Indonesia, this would be super important for you to share with your employees, because that would be a big mistake to walk in and greet the president of the company that they're visiting and shake with their left hand. Big problem, definitely setting a bad impression. Okay, taking a look at Russia. In Russia, you would not give an even number of flowers as a gift, meaning a dozen roses, let's just say, or 2, 4, 6, right? Any even number. The reason why is because it means, well, they use even numbered flowers for when the recipient has passed away. So at funerals, all of the flowers are always put together in arrangements with even numbers, whereas odd numbers of flowers means that the recipient has a pulse or is alive. And I included this one because gift giving is an important part of business culture in a lot of different countries. So it's just important to know some of the nuances when it comes to specific gifts. Another interesting fact about Russia is that you never wish someone happy birthday before the actual day of their birthday. And that's because there's a superstition that if someone tells you happy birthday in advance, then you will die before you get to your birthday. So just a weird superstition, but again, good to know. We would not want to travel to Russia and say, oh, I know that your birthday is in a week. I hope you have a really happy birthday. That would be considered really bad luck. And again, set the wrong kind of tone. Think just 1 or 2 more of these interesting facts. So in Singapore, you do not sit at a table if you see a packet of tissue paper sitting on the table. Kind of like here in America, we might hang our coat on the back of a seat, or lay, for women, we may set our purse like next to our place setting to kind of reserve our spot. But in Singapore, they carry tissue, and that is how they reserve their spot if they have to get up from the table or something like that. So another thing to watch out for. Okay, before I move on from the fun facts, everything that I talked about here, if you think about it, it's relevant to a business setting. So you want to make sure, because it's very easy once you start researching different cultures, you're going to learn about their entertainment, about their religion, about their politics. So typically those things are not super relevant to having a business conversation and trying to close a deal. That's not to say they always aren't. And that's because sometimes in some countries, entertainment is part of business. So business is done over dinner in other countries. And that happens in the US too, but not as a rule. In some countries, big deals only happen over a meal. So you want to make sure that everything that you convey to your employees in this presentation is relevant to their business trip. Don't go too far off the beaten path with giving them just fun facts. You want them to be facts, even fun facts, that are relevant to the purpose of their trip. That's probably the biggest reason that students don't do well on this assignment, is because they just go too far off on the tangents, and as interesting and as accurate as the content may be, it's not relevant if it's not related to business. Okay, so the case details. In the case, it's a 6-week project in the case. We're not working on it for 6 weeks, but the idea is that they have these first 2 weeks where they're going to be communicating with their counterparts in the other country via phone, via text, via email. So they're going to be making arrangements, in terms of what the agendas might be and how they're going to navigate their trip. And then in weeks 3 and 4, they'll actually go ahead and embark on the journey to the other country. And they need to know how to interact with their counterparts in that country while they're there. So we're talking about phone communication, email communication, as well as in-person communication. You want to be able to, I guess I'm going to say Google, but you should research all of those things. Don't just Google, business in Indonesia. You want to Google communication in Indonesia and communication on the phone in Indonesia. What's considered rude, what's considered appropriate, as well as communication in person. So basically, we're looking at how they communicate before, during, and after the trip. Things that you are required to include. And these really can kind of guide how you start to research and how you start to structure everything with your PowerPoint. So you do need to talk about written communication in terms of emails, essentially, maybe even memos and things like that. Oral communication, and that is both in person and on the phone. And then body language. You'll be surprised how much you can dig up when it comes to body language. For most countries, it's not super relevant in all different countries, but for a lot of countries, body language, things like shaking hands, bowing, opening doors, taking the first seat at the table. There's a lot of cultural norms that are different from what we do in the US. And as the theme goes, you want to make sure that your employees don't make a mistake with their body language and how they're expressing themselves that way. So remember that you're teaching. And we talked about the rhetorical situation. We talk about it a lot, especially when we're sitting down to write a piece of paper or to write a paper. We're thinking about, why are we writing? Who's the audience? How much background do they need? All of these types of things. And in the previous assignments that we've done, we've really been informing, persuading, and instructing. In this case, you're really just teaching. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about each of these elements of the rhetorical situation, because you're teaching with the visual aid of a PowerPoint. So you want to make sure that your PowerPoint is supporting what you're saying. And to make that clearer, you'll be recording narration on the PowerPoint. So it's going to kind of mimic what it would be like if you were to give the presentation in person. So this is an example of a slide that you might create for your presentation. And I chose China for the example, since no one will be using that. That way I'm not taking any good information away from anybody's project. So what I did when I designed this slide is I put the American flag on the left and the Chinese flag on the right. And then I put different aspects of the cultures that are kind of contradictory to each other on, I lined them up. So in the US, we are very individualistic. It's all, everything's for me. I did the work. I want the raise. In China, it's the opposite. No one would ever step up to take credit for something that more than one person worked on. Even if only one person did work on it, they still don't want that kind of recognition or credit, because it's seen as incredibly rude. So it's a very group mindset in China as compared to individual in the US. In terms of their approach of speaking and the way that they behave in a business context. In the US, we're pretty casual, more and more and more so today, even than we were 10 years ago. In China, it's still very formal. So that would be something I would, if I was delivering this presentation to the employees, I would say, so you're going to need to make sure that as far as the business attire that you bring, it's on the formal side. You should not, women should not be wearing revealing clothing. Men should not be wearing, t-shirts or shorts or anything like that. So in the US, we're proud and boastful. In China, we're very humble. Time in America is very different in the way that it's from the way it's perceived in China. If a meeting starts at 2, it's supposed to start at 2 in the US. And certainly, like today, sometimes people run a moment or two late, but generally speaking, when something starts at a certain time, that's the time it starts at. In China, if a meeting starts at 2, It might actually start at 2:30. People do not rush. There's no sense of stress to hurry up and be there on time. If it means, ending something else short or in any way negatively impacting what came before, say the 2 o'clock meeting, it's fine to be late. People are patient and they understand. And in the US, this isn't actually 100% true anymore. But it, I wrote don't mix business and pleasure. And let's just use it as an example. Let's say in the US, we don't really mix business and pleasure. In China, however, they have a concept called guanxi, which is where you actually really do work to get to know your business partners, their personal life, their family life, the things that they like to do. And you build that personal relationship. And only then, once the personal relationship has reached a certain level of trust, would a big business deal happen. Whereas in the US, I guess this is true. In the US, that's not necessarily important. Business people will make deals with people who they don't like or they don't know. Business is business. So they can be very separate in the US, whereas in China, that's people don't do business with people they don't know. It's not common. So again, this is a sample slide of something that you might put together, and then you would be explaining it in a similar manner to what I explained to you. And this kind of segues into the conversation I want to have about creating a PowerPoint. What you see on the screen is just the key points that I then went on to elaborate on. So they do serve as visual cues to remind me what I want to talk about while this screen is here, but I am not reading off of the screen. I am not, I don't have just 3 or 4 bullet points that are full sentences that then I read to my audience. That is not effective. You don't need to read what's on the screen because your audience can read for themselves. Instead, you want what is either behind you on the screen or in front of a virtual audience who is also listening to your voice. It just supports what you're saying. You are the focus. Whatever comes out of your mouth, that is the important information, not what's on the slides. That's just to keep things interesting, to throw a little bit of color in, to emphasize key points. So when you create your PowerPoint slides, think in terms of avoiding bullet points. I know everybody says use bullet points, and you can. Let's flip back here. So these are bullet points, I guess. Actually, they're full sentences. And same here, I've got some sentences. So if you're going to use sentences and bullet points like this, you still have to elaborate on them. So it's really best to do more of a slide like this, right? So this is just kind of hitting the key points and then I'll elaborate on them, or a slide like this one where it's got an image and then just one key point pops up. And then this one's really probably the most effective because it's got some movement to it and it's not cluttered by text at all, allowing the audience to pay attention to you. If I filled up my screens when I did these PowerPoints with you guys with tons and tons of text, and I either A, read it to you, you would stop coming to the meetings because you do not want to be read to. Or if I B, started saying a whole bunch of other things that were not on the slide, then you're conflicted. What do? Do you read the slide? Do you listen to what I'm saying? When am I going to change the slide? What if you miss something important on the slide? So it's overwhelming when your audience feels like they have to take in the slide and you. So allow them to take in what you're saying and just highlight on the slide. Okay, I am going to go back into PowerPoint too, just to show you guys a couple of tips for creating pretty PowerPoints that will be effective and earn you a good grade. But before I click out of this PowerPoint, the due date is not 3/19. The due date is 3/26. Okay. And you'll be submitting a narrated PowerPoint with animation and transitions and color and visual engagement. And I strongly suggest that you don't just wing it when it comes to your narration. I would create at the very least like a list of bullet points for your key points for each slide to help you as you're rehearsing. And then just like with your elevator pitch, you want to rehearse enough that you can go through the presentation and deliver it with confidence, not wing it like it's the first time you've ever said all these things and you're going to record and turn it in. I will know more than likely, unless you're an expert on a certain country, then you don't you don't really have as much work to do here. But if it's new information that you're taking in to develop your PowerPoint, you will not be able to wing it well. So definitely rehearse. Okay. I had a whole slide with due dates on it. I'm not sure where it is. Okay, so your planning log for this assignment is going to be due on Friday, March 3rd. And then we have this week and next week to work on it. And then you guys have spring break starting the week of the 13th. So you don't have to check in at all during that week. You can work on the project if you want or not. It's normally a 3-week assignment. So in this case, you have 4 weeks because spring break is in there. So there's no, we're not trying to rush it. We just allowed the extra week. And then the assignment itself is due Sunday, the 26th. So I feel like I want to double check myself, guys, just to make sure. Yeah, that's correct. So it is due on March 26th. And if you want to send a draft to me, you can do that by Thursday, the 23rd. So let's just jump really quickly into PowerPoint so I can show you. It's really just one main trick that I use to add a little bit of variation to my PowerPoints. And what you do is you just click on your slide. You kind of just throw the information on in any way, like this. This is not particularly well formatted. It's just information thrown on a slide. So if you go to the design tool, which is in the top menu, and then you go all the way to the right and you click designer. This, of course, it has no ideas for this slide. That doesn't typically happen. So I selected another slide. You can see the designer is now giving me different options for the layout. So sometimes it's moving the picture over to the right. It's adding this little orange line for decor, or we can switch it to look like this. So really, it takes a lot of the design work out of the equation for you if you use that feature in PowerPoint. Another thing that you should do as you're creating your PowerPoint, as the slides, you start to have 5, 6, 7 slides, you want to look at them here in this, like the window pane view. Make sure they're different from slide to slide. Another big mistake I see is students finding images and then they put every image like here on the left, here on the left, here on the left, and then there's bullet points on the right. So every slide is the same. Picture on the left, bullets on the right, or picture on the right, bullets on the left. That is really boring. The whole purpose of the PowerPoint is, well, not the whole purpose, but a big part of it is to keep your audience entertained and engaged. So that means that you want there to be variation from slide to slide. So if you look at the pane view of mine, you can see that the picture moves from one side to the other. This one has a green border around the picture. This one doesn't have a picture at all, but it's got this little image. And, PowerPoint gives me other ways to present the information if I wanted to. So make sure that you are not submitting redundant, repetitive slides, I guess, is the key at the end of the day. So I will jump back in. Do you guys have any questions for me about the assignment or anything else? And if not, you can feel free to hop off and I'll post this recording as soon as it's ready.
Professor, I just have one thing.
Sure.
I got your email for my draft that we're working on separately.
Okay.
So I'll just send, I'm